A moving tale of redemption. A moving story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings, where a millionaire fires his housekeeper. But when she leaves, the millionaire feels her absence. He was in love with her. But before telling this story, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, continuing with. The setting sun's light streamed through the mirror windows of the luxurious penthouse in the heart of New York, casting golden shadows on the marble floor. Michael Anderson adjusted his silk tie in the mirror, his dark brown eyes reflecting the same coldness that had transformed him into one of the country's most feared entrepreneurs. At 35, he perfectly embodied success, a proud bearing, a well-defined jaw, and a wardrobe that cost more than what many would earn in an entire lifetime. His phone vibrated for the third time that morning. It was Frank, his assistant, reminding him of the meeting with shareholders. Michael ignored the message, his thoughts lost in the conversation he had with his father exactly 15 years earlier, when he had taken control of Anderson Construction. Feelings are luxuries that men like us cannot afford to have, my son, Robert Anderson had said, signing the documents that transferred management of the company to his son. Your mother is the perfect example of what happens when we let emotions control our decisions. The sound of the kitchen door closing softly brought him back to the present. It was her, the new employee his housekeeper had hired a few weeks earlier. Emma. He observed her discreetly through the mirror's reflection as she crossed the hallway with her cleaning products, always in silence, always with that dignity. That intrigued him. There was something different about her. It wasn't her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful, with her chestnut hair always gathered in a simple bun and honey-colored eyes that seemed to carry a story he couldn't decipher. It was her presence. Emma moved through the house as if she were invisible, but left subtle traces everywhere she went. The delicate aroma of lavender on the sheets, the always fresh flowers in the dining room, the meticulous order with which she organized his papers in the office. "Excuse me, Mr. Anderson." Her voice was soft yet firm. "I need to clean the bedroom before I leave." He nodded without turning around, but his eyes followed her through the reflection. Emma began her daily ritual. She fully opened the curtains, letting light bathe the room, dusted the furniture with care that bordered on reverence, changed the flowers on the bedside table. Her movements were precise, like a silent dance she had perfected over the years. "Have you always been this way?" The question escaped his lips before he could hold it back. Emma paused for a moment, her hands suspended above the floral arrangement she was adjusting. "In what way, sir?" "So." He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Methodical." A discreet smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "Life teaches us to do everything as if it were the most important thing in the world, Mr. Anderson. Especially when we don't have much." The answer took him by surprise, not for the wisdom it contained, but for its disarming sincerity. It was the first time they had exchanged more than the necessary words, and something about this brief interaction troubled him. The phone vibrated again, this time with a call. It was Barbara Mitchell, the new minority partner in the construction company. Michael answered quickly, his voice taking on the professional tone that characterized him. "I'm already on my way," he said, ending the call without greetings. When he turned around, Emma had already finished her task and was heading for the door, but something made her stop at the threshold. "Mr. Anderson?" She turned, hesitant. "You never finish your meals. Today I left a little less food as you actually eat. I hope that doesn't bother you." The observation hit him like a punch to the stomach. In 15 years, no one had noticed this detail. Or if they had noticed, no one had ever cared enough to mention it. His father always said that employees were paid to serve, not to observe. "How did you—" he began, but she had already disappeared down the hallway. That evening, sitting in his dining room with a view of the city, Michael was surprised to look at the plate served. The portion was indeed perfectly suited to his appetite. Next to it, a single flower had been placed in a small crystal vase, a touch that had never existed before. The phone rang again. It was his mother, Ellen, calling from the rehabilitation clinic where she was spending increasingly longer periods. He let the call drop into voicemail as he always did. His father's words echoed in his mind. Your mother chose weakness, son. We chose strength. But that night, for the first time in a long time, Michael wondered if he had really chosen strength, or if he had simply learned to confuse strength with loneliness. In her small apartment in the suburbs, Emma massaged her sore feet after another day of double employment. The restaurant where she served lunches was crowded, and Mr. Anderson's house demanded attention that exhausted her energies. But it was the look of her mother lying in the next room that weighed most heavily on her heart. "Emma, my daughter?" Mrs. Rose Carter's weak voice came through the thin partition. "Have you eaten breakfast yet?" "Yes, Mom. Do you need anything?" "No, my darling. I just wanted to hear your voice." Emma closed her eyes, holding back tears. The medications for her mother's degenerative disease consumed half of her earnings, and the experimental treatment the doctor had suggested was completely beyond her reach. Each day was a battle against time and against the bills that accumulated. Her phone vibrated with a message from her friend Rachel, who worked at the same restaurant. "There's a wedding Saturday. They pay well. Want to do it?" Emma quickly responded in the affirmative. She couldn't afford the luxury of refusing additional work, even if it meant sacrificing her only day off. As she prepared for sleep, her thoughts returned to the unusual conversation with Mr. Anderson. There was something about him that intrigued her, a loneliness she recognized, perhaps because she carried her own version of it. The next morning, arriving at the penthouse, Emma found something different. On the kitchen counter there was a half-empty coffee cup and a plate with toast remnants. It was the first time she had seen him leave traces of his existence, as if somehow his presence was beginning to cross the invisible walls he had built around himself. What Emma didn't know was that at that moment, Michael was in his office at the construction company, distracted during an important meeting, his thoughts constantly returning to yesterday's conversation. For the first time in years, someone had seen through his armor, and that frightened him more than any financial crisis he had ever faced. Barbara Mitchell, the associate who had recently purchased shares in the company, observed Michael with interest during the meeting. There was something different about him, an unusual distraction, an air of vulnerability she had never noticed before. "Michael," Barbara's voice brought him back to reality. "Are you all right? You seem distant." "I'm fine," he replied sharply, recomposing his mask of efficiency. But he wasn't. Something had changed, and he didn't know how to explain what. The day flowed in its seemingly normal routine, but there was a tension in the air, as if the universe was setting the stage for a significant change. What neither of them knew was that their destinies were about to intertwine in a way neither could have predicted, and that the next chapter of their lives would begin not with a grand event, but with a simple misunderstanding that would change everything. When night fell over New York, Michael found on his desk a simple note written in delicate calligraphy. "Mr. Anderson, today you didn't have lunch again. I've left soup in the refrigerator. It's my mother's recipe for difficult days. Emma." He held the paper between his fingers for a long moment, feeling the weight of this simple gesture. In his world of million-dollar contracts and relentless negotiations, this small act of attention seemed strangely more precious than any deal he had ever closed. What he didn't know was that this note would be the first in a series of small moments that would begin to dismantle, brick by brick, the wall he had built around his heart. And that Emma, the woman he barely noticed, would be responsible for. A silent revolution in his life, a revolution that would begin with soup in the refrigerator and end with a lesson on the true meaning of strength and weakness. The following weeks brought a subtle change in the penthouse's atmosphere. It was as if the air had become lighter, less charged with the loneliness that previously weighed in every room. Michael began to notice small details that went unnoticed before. How Emma always left his newspaper perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. How she had discovered his preference for jasmine and now left a discreet arrangement in his office each morning. One particularly frantic morning, Michael was rushing out for a meeting when he collided with Emma in the hallway. She was carrying a stack of clean towels that spilled onto the floor. For a moment, their gazes met as they both bent down to pick up the towels. "Excuse me," she whispered, her hands lightly brushing his as she took the last towel. "It's my fault," he replied, his voice softer than usual. "I was distracted." It was a brief moment, but enough for Michael to notice the delicate perfume she used, something floral, delicate like her presence. He also noticed the signs of fatigue under her eyes, the small signs that told the story of someone who worked beyond their limits. At the office, during the meeting with investors, Michael found himself thinking about that moment. Barbara Mitchell, sitting across from him, was presenting the figures for the last quarter, but his mind wandered to the expression in Emma's eyes, that mixture of dignity and exhaustion that increasingly intrigued him. "Michael?" Barbara's voice brought him back. "Are you listening to me?" "Of course," he replied automatically, recomposing himself. "Continue." But Barbara wasn't foolish. After the meeting, she followed him to his office. "You're different," she commented, sitting on the edge of his desk with a familiarity that annoyed him. "More distracted. That's not like you." "I'm just tired," he cut her short, but Barbara wasn't fooled. "Are you sure? Because I've heard you're spending more time at home lately. That's not like you either." There was something in her tone that alerted him. Barbara had always been ambitious, and her recent acquisition of shares in the construction company had made her even more vigilant of his every move. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, Emma was facing her own dilemmas. While cleaning Michael's office, she found an envelope fallen behind the bookcase. Picking it up, she recognized the letterhead of a private hospital, the same one where her mother had been examined once, before the costs became prohibitive. Her professional ethics told her not to look, but something about the envelope caught her attention. It was open, and an old photo was sticking out. Emma couldn't avoid seeing the image, an elegant woman with a fragile appearance, embraced by a younger Michael. On the back, a date and an annotation: Ellen Anderson's last hospitalization, 2020. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly put the envelope back where she had found it. Her heart was beating faster, not because of the near discovery, but for the unexpected revelation. So that's why he always ignored those specific calls. They came from his mother, hospitalized in a clinic. That evening, returning home, Emma found her mother in the midst of a crisis. Mrs. Rose Carter was trembling, her hands unable to hold the glass of water. "My daughter," she whispered between spasms, "I can't bear this pain anymore." Emma held back her tears while helping her mother take her medication. The money was running out, and the new treatment seemed increasingly distant. That's when her friend Rachel appeared with an enticing proposition. "I know someone," she said, sitting in the small kitchen of the apartment, "who lends money without much bureaucracy. The interest rates are high, but—" "No," Emma firmly cut her off. "I've seen too many in the neighborhood, Rachel. People who lost everything because of those loans." "But your mother needs the treatment," Rachel insisted. "And you have that job with the rich executive. If something goes wrong—" "No," Emma repeated, even more firmly. "I won't mix things up. My work there is sacred." What Emma couldn't imagine was that at that precise moment, Michael was in his home office looking at the soup she had left in the refrigerator. There was something about her gesture that disconcerted him, a genuine attention he wasn't used to receiving. His phone rang. It was Frank, his assistant, with concerning news. "Mr. Anderson, Ms. Mitchell has been asking questions about your routine, your employees." Michael felt a pressure in his chest. He knew Barbara well enough to know she never did anything without purpose. "What type of questions?" "About your new employee, mainly, the one who works at your home." The tie. Warning was enough to awaken his protective instincts, not only of himself, but surprisingly of Emma. Something about the idea of Barbara investigating Emma's life deeply disturbed him. The next morning, the atmosphere in the penthouse was different. Emma perceived it as soon as she arrived. Michael was at home, a rare thing at this hour, and he seemed tense. She found him in the kitchen, with the coffee cup she always prepared for him in his hand. "Emma," he called, his voice controlled. "I need to ask you a question." She stopped, feeling the weight of his gaze. "Yes, sir." "Why do you do all this? The coffees, the soups, the flowers. Why?" The question took her by surprise. Emma felt her face warm, but kept her composure. "Because it's the right thing to do, Mr. Anderson. Because sometimes people need to know that someone notices their existence. The answer hit him like a punch. It was exactly what he had tried to avoid all his life. Being noticed, being truly seen by someone. And there was this woman who barely earned enough to make ends meet, offering him something all his money had never been able to buy: genuine attention. "You don't know me," he said, more abruptly than he had intended. "No," she agreed, holding his gaze, "but I know loneliness when I see it, Mr. Anderson, and it tastes the same in any social class." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with untold truths. Michael wanted to say something, perhaps thank her, perhaps fire her. But before he could decide, his phone rang again. It was from the hospital where his mother was hospitalized. Emma observed the change in his expression when he saw the number. Now that she knew about Ellen Anderson, she could better understand the pain she saw pass through his eyes before he set the phone down without answering. "If you'll excuse me," she said softly, turning to leave. But before she reached the door, she heard his voice, almost a whisper. "Emma?" She turned around. "The soup was good." That's all he said, but there was something in his tone, a vulnerability she had never noticed before. Emma smiled slightly and left, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts and a cup of coffee that, for the first time in years, he drank to the bottom. What neither of them knew was that Barbara Mitchell had just hired a private detective to dig into Emma's past, and that somewhere in the dusty archives of Anderson Construction there was a document that linked their stories in a way neither of them could have imagined, a secret that, once revealed, would test not only the fragile connection that was beginning to form between them, but also everything they believed about trust, forgiveness, and redemption. Sunday morning in New York awoke gray, the heavy sky promising one of those rains that transform the city into a labyrinth of umbrellas and traffic jams. Emma woke up earlier than usual despite it being her day off. The sound of her mother's difficult breathing in the next room kept her in a constant state of alertness. While she prepared breakfast, her phone vibrated with a message from Rachel. "Friend, that connection I told you about, he can lend you the amount for your mother's treatment today itself. Think about it carefully." Emma looked at the phone for a long moment, her heart torn between the desperation of seeing her mother suffer and the fear of the consequences of a dubious loan. That's when another message arrived, this time from Michael's housekeeper. "Emma, I know it's your Sunday, but Mr. Anderson has asked if you could come today. He's offering double for overtime." The coincidence tightened her heart. It was the first time Michael had specifically requested her presence on a Sunday. Something had changed since that conversation in the kitchen, as if an invisible wall had begun to crumble between them. "I'm coming," she replied, after checking that her neighbor could stay with Mrs. Rose Carter. When she arrived at the penthouse, she found Michael in his office, immersed in old papers and looking more dejected than usual. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment Emma saw something different in his gaze, a vulnerability he usually kept well hidden. "Emma," he said, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't slept, "thank you for coming." "You look tired, Mr. Anderson. Would you like me to prepare some coffee?" He gestured affirmatively, and Emma noticed that his hands were trembling slightly as he held the documents. When she returned with the coffee, she found him staring at an old photograph. "My mother," he said without looking up, surprising her with this spontaneous confidence. "She's been in the clinic for 3 months this time. The doctors say it's the worst crisis so far." Emma felt her heart tighten, remembering the photo she had found a few days earlier. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the hardest thing isn't seeing someone suffer, but not knowing how to help." Michael looked up, surprised by the precision of these words. "How do you—" "My mother is also sick," she revealed, pouring coffee into his favorite cup. "A degenerative disease. Each day is a battle." A different silence settled between them, not the awkward silence of boss and servant, but the understanding silence of two people who share a similar pain. "Why have you never asked for help?" he suddenly asked. "You've been working at my home for months. You know my financial situation." "Because dignity has no price, Mr. Anderson," she simply replied, "and because some burdens we must carry alone to know our strength." His words struck him with unexpected force. It was exactly the opposite of everything his father had taught him about money and power. At that moment, Emma's phone vibrated. It was a message from Rachel with more details about the loan. Michael noticed her change of expression. "A problem?" "No," she quickly replied, putting away her phone. "Nothing important." But Michael had learned to read her expressions. "Emma," he said, his voice softer than usual, "if you need something—" "You already do a lot by giving me a dignified job," she gently interrupted. "That's more than most people would do." Outside, the rain finally began to fall, creating a curtain of water that isolated the penthouse from the rest of the world. Emma moved to close the windows, but stopped upon hearing Michael's voice. "My father always said that feelings are luxuries that men like me cannot afford," he said almost to himself. "That trusting people is an unnecessary risk." Emma turned to him, observing how the diffuse light of the storm softened his usually hard features. "And you believe that?" "I used to," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Until—" The moment was interrupted by the shrill sound of the phone. It was Barbara Mitchell. Michael answered with evident irritation. "No, I can't have lunch today," he said sharply. "I have other commitments." When he hung up, Emma had already returned to her tasks, but something had changed in the air between them. It was as if this Sunday morning had created a small crack in the wall that separated them. What neither of them knew was that at that precise moment, the detective hired by Barbara had just discovered something in the old archives of the construction company, a connection that would change everything. Meanwhile, in the rehabilitation clinic, Ellen Anderson looked out the window of her room, observing the same rain falling on the city. Between her hands, an old letter she had never shown her son, a letter that contained a secret that could explain why Emma seemed so strangely familiar to him. Back at the penthouse, Emma finished her tasks in silence, but each of her movements was accompanied by Michael's attentive eyes. When she was preparing to leave, he called her again. "Emma?" She turned, waiting. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for the coffee." Emma smiled, that smile that always seemed to light up the environment a little more. "Sometimes, Mr. Anderson, the greatest strength lies in admitting that we need each other." She left, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a half-full cup of coffee. On the table, the photo of his mother seemed to look at him with a different expression, as if she knew something he had yet to discover. The phone vibrated again. It was Frank, his assistant, with an urgent message. "Mr. Anderson, Miss Mitchell has found something in the old archives, something about the father of one of your employees." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Something told him that the storm falling outside was just a harbinger of a much greater storm that was coming. And, for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure that his carefully constructed walls would be strong enough to protect him, or if, for the first time, he really wanted them to be. Monday arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Michael had slept little, with Frank's words resonating in his mind. He arrived early at the office, determined to discover what Barbara had found in the old archives. But she was already waiting for him, sitting in his office with a smile that mixed triumph and threat. "Good morning, Michael," she said, lifting a yellowed file. "I think you'll want to see this." With fingers he strove not to make tremble, Michael opened the file. The first page was an old employee record, dating back almost 30 years. The name in the header froze his blood. Anthony Carter. "Does the last name seem familiar?" asked Barbara, her voice distilling a false innocence. "It should. It's the same as your housekeeper's." Michael scanned the document with hungry eyes, each word revealing a story he had never imagined. Anthony Carter had been an exemplary employee of the construction company for 15 years, until his dismissal after an embezzlement scandal. The most shocking part, the dismissal order had been signed by his own father, Robert Anderson. "Does she know?" The question escaped his lips before he could hold it back. "Your little housekeeper?" Barbara laughed without humor. "I don't know, but the most interesting question is, why is she working precisely at your home? Coincidence?" The insinuation hit him like a slap. "Emma is not that kind of person," he said with a firmness that surprised them both. "Ah, now it's Emma." Barbara leaned forward. "Michael, you're getting too involved. First the different schedules, now this familiarity. The board won't like this at all. The board has nothing to do with who I hire for my home. Yes, when that person is the daughter of a man who almost destroyed the company's reputation." Barbara threw another document on the table. "Anthony Carter died 5 years ago, bankrupt, abandoned, destroyed. And now his daughter is at your home with access to your documents, your routine." "Enough!" Michael hit the table with enough force to make the coffee cup tremble. "You don't know her." "And you, do you know her?" Barbara stood up, adjusting her impeccable blazer. "Think carefully, Michael. Your reputation, everything your father built, is it worth risking all that for a housekeeper?" After she left, Michael remained motionless for long minutes, looking at the documents scattered on his desk. Old photos showed Anthony Carter, a man with a kind smile, similar to Emma's. Reports from the time indicated he had been accused of appropriating funds from a social project of the construction company, but the evidence was circumstantial. In his penthouse, Emma was organizing the books in the office when she found an envelope fallen behind the bookcase, different from the one with Ellen Anderson's photo. It was a brown envelope, aged, with the Anderson Construction letterhead. Her hands trembled when she recognized the handwriting on the back. It was her father's handwriting. The envelope contained a letter dated 1995, addressed to Robert Anderson. Emma knew she shouldn't read it, but something stronger than her professional ethics pushed her to unfold the paper yellowed by time. "Dear Mr. Robert, I write this letter not to beg for my job, but for the truth. The money taken from the social project did not pass through my hands. I have evidence that the documentation was falsified, but I need time to—" Emma couldn't finish reading. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly put the letter back in the envelope, but her world had already been turned upside down. Memories of her childhood invaded her mind like a whirlwind. Her father, always so upright, who withered after the dismissal, incessantly repeating that he had been unjustly accused until the day he simply disappeared, leaving them drowning. In debt. The phone in her pocket was vibrating insistently. It was her friend Rachel. "Emma, the loan shark I told you about will only wait until tonight. It's your last chance to get the money for your mother's treatment." Her hands were trembling as she put away her phone. The universe seemed to be playing a cruel joke. The same day she discovered a possible injustice against her father, she was tempted to do exactly what he had been accused of, dealing with dirty money. The sound of the front door opening made her jump. Michael had returned earlier, and something in his expression froze Emma's heart. He was looking at her differently, as if seeing her for the first time, or as if finally understanding something that had been in front of him all this time. "Emma," his voice sounded deeper than usual. "We need to talk." She felt the weight of the envelope in her pocket, where she had hastily hidden it. "Yes, sir." "Why did you never tell me about your father?" The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. Emma felt the blood leave her face, but maintained the composure she had learned to cultivate since childhood. "I didn't know it was relevant to my duties, Mr. Anderson." "Don't play with me." He advanced a few steps, his voice mixing anger and something else, pain, perhaps. "Anthony Carter, employee of Anderson Construction for 15 years, dismissed for embezzlement. Your father." Emma lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of defiance and dignity. "Yes, my father, the man your family destroyed with false accusations." "You can't prove that." Emma's hand instinctively touched the envelope in her pocket. "Perhaps I can," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The silence that followed was dense, charged with decades of untold stories, inherited pains, half-truths. Michael observed her with a complex expression, like a man who had just discovered that the ground beneath his feet wasn't as solid as he thought. "Why did you come to work here?" he finally asked, his voice softer. "Was it for revenge?" Emma felt tears forming in her eyes but didn't allow them to fall. "No, Mr. Anderson. I came because I needed the job, because my mother is sick and the medications are expensive, Because, unlike what your family did to mine, I still believe it's possible to earn a living with dignity." His words struck him with unexpected force. Michael found himself recalling each of her small gestures over the past few months. The care given to his things, the meals prepared with attention, the genuine concern for his well-being. None of this matched someone motivated by revenge. Emma's phone rang again. It was from the hospital where her mother received her therapies. She answered with a trembling hand, her face paling even more as she listened. "My mother," she murmured. As she hung up, "She had a crisis. I need to go." Michael observed her hastily take her bag, fighting against a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. When she was about to leave, he called her. "Emma?" She stopped without turning around. "You're fired." The words left his mouth like stones, heavy and cold. Emma didn't immediately respond. When she finally turned around, there was something in her gaze that would haunt him for many nights. Not anger, not resentment, just a deep and unshakable dignity. "You know, Mr. Anderson," she said softly, "my father always said that a man's true wealth doesn't lie in what he possesses, but in what he doesn't need to do to sleep peacefully at night." With these words, she left, leaving behind not only a job, but also a man in conflict with everything he had always believed to be true. The envelope in her pocket weighed like lead, just like the secret Michael carried, that he had already ordered a confidential investigation into Anthony Carter's case, motivated by a doubt he could no longer ignore. The rain was starting again in New York, as if the sky were crying. For all the unspoken words, for all the truths still hidden, for all the hearts broken by pride and prejudice. In her luxurious office, Barbara Mitchell smiled, satisfied, not knowing that she had just set in motion a series of events that would forever change not only the lives of Emma and Michael, but also her carefully designed plans. The days following. Emma's dismissal were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions for all involved. The penthouse, previously warmed by Emma's silent but significant presence, seemed to have sunk into a cold that no heating system could chase away. Michael found himself unconsciously looking for the small gestures that had become part of his routine. The perfectly prepared coffee, the fresh flowers, the discreet notes that reminded him to eat. The new housekeeper was efficient but mechanical. There was no soul in her movements, no attention beyond the professional in her actions. It was on a particularly difficult morning that Michael found, forgotten in a drawer, one of Emma's old notes. "Mr. Anderson, don't forget that strength also lies in knowing how to ask for help." The irony of these words now choked him. Meanwhile, Emma was facing her personal battle. Mrs. Rose Carter's condition had considerably worsened, and the costs of treatment were becoming increasingly impossible to bear. Sitting in the waiting room of the public hospital, she reread her father's letter found in Michael's office, each word fueling a mixture of anger and hope. "Emma?" Rachel's voice brought her back to reality. Her friend was holding 2 coffees. "From the corner kiosk. I brought you this. You've been here for almost 24 hours. "Thank you," murmured Emma, accepting the coffee with a trembling hand. "The doctors say she needs a specific, more aggressive treatment, but the national health system doesn't cover it, and without my job at the penthouse—" "The loan shark." "He's still willing to lend," Rachel began, but Emma's look made her stop. "No, I've already said I won't go down that road." At that same moment, in the Anderson construction office, Michael was receiving the preliminary report of the investigation he had commissioned on Anthony Carter's case. The private detective, a discreet and competent man, presented troubling evidence. "The signatures on the documents that incriminated Mr. Carter show inconsistencies," he explained, spreading papers on the table, "and there are records of bank transfers that don't match the official version." "Continue investigating," ordered Michael, his voice tense. "I want to know exactly what happened." But before he could delve deeper into the subject, Barbara burst into his office, her high heels clicking on the floor with the same determination as her words. "The board is concerned, Michael," she announced without preamble. "Your recent behaviors, this sudden obsession with the old archives, it doesn't please them." The board or you, Barbara? She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Did you know that your ex-housekeeper was at St. Luke's private hospital yesterday, looking to hospitalize her mother? Interesting how some people don't know their place, isn't it? The mention of Emma awakened something in Michael, a mixture of concern and guilt that he was trying to repress. Are you having me watched? No, dear friend, I'm protecting the company's interests, and you're allowing a story from the past which should remain buried to threaten everything your father built. It was the reference to his father that finally made Michael explode. My father built an empire based on what, Barbara? On lies, on injustices? Your father did what was necessary, she replied coldly. As you should do now. Forget this girl and her family. Some people are born to serve, others to lead. It's the natural order of things. Barbara's words resonated in Michael's mind long after her departure. Sitting in his office, he found himself looking at his father's picture on the wall, the portrait of an authoritarian man who had always known exactly what he wanted, or at least that's what he thought. The phone rang. It was Frank. Mr. Anderson, we've discovered something about Ms. Mitchell. She was on the company's board of directors at the time of the Carter case, and there are records of private meetings between her and your father in the days preceding the dismissal. The revelation hit Michael like lightning. Suddenly, Barbara's obsessive interest in the case took on a new dimension. She wasn't just protecting the company, she was protecting herself. That evening, returning to his empty penthouse, Michael found the new housekeeper finishing her tasks. You can leave, he said, barely noticing her presence. His gaze was fixed on the window, observing the city his father had helped build, wondering how many other Anthony Carters had been sacrificed in the process. That's when his phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Mr. Anderson, this is Rachel, Emma's friend. I know I shouldn't interfere, but she needs help. Her mother is very ill and she's considering doing something dangerous to get money for the treatment. She would kill me if she knew I was telling you this, but... Michael felt his heart tighten. The message continued, revealing that Emma was under pressure from local loan sharks, dangerous people who had discovered her connection to the Anderson family. Without thinking twice, he took his car keys. On the way to the hospital, his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as his mind worked furiously. Years of teachings about non-engagement, about maintaining emotional distances, about protecting the family name, all of it seemed insignificant in the face of the possibility that Emma might put herself in danger. At the public hospital, Emma held her mother's hand, who slept restlessly after another crisis. The envelope with her father's letter weighed in her bag, along with a decision she had never imagined having to make, whether or not to accept the loan shark's offer, who promised money for the treatment in exchange for information about Anderson. Construction. My love, whispered Mrs. Rose Carter in her sleep, your father would be so proud of you. The tears Emma had been holding back finally flowed. It was at that moment that a nurse rushed into the room. Miss Carter, there's a man outside who wants to speak with you. He said he is Michael Anderson. Emma felt her world spin. Outside the room, Michael was waiting, holding an envelope and carrying in his gaze something she had never seen before. Not the coldness of the successful entrepreneur, but the vulnerability of a man who had finally understood that some battles are not won alone. The corridor of the public hospital seemed even colder and more impersonal when Emma left her mother's room. Michael was there, his imposing figure displaced among the peeling walls and worn plastic chairs. For a moment neither spoke. The weight of all the unspoken words between them made the air almost unbreathable. How is she? Michael finally broke the silence, his voice softer than Emma remembered. Stable for now, replied Emma, maintaining the dignity that had always characterized her. But the doctor says that without the specific treatment... I know, he interrupted, handing her the envelope he was holding. That's why I'm here. Emma looked at the envelope without taking it, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of defiance and fatigue. I don't need charity, Mr. Anderson. It's not charity. He took a step forward, his voice low but intense. It's justice. I've found other documents about your father, Emma. Barbara Mitchell was on the company's board at the time. She and my father, There was something wrong about that whole story. The words hit Emma like successive waves, each stronger than the previous. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope, but before she could open it, a commotion at the end of the corridor caught her attention. It was Rachel, followed by two threatening-looking men. Emma's blood froze as she recognized one of them, the loan shark who had been pressuring her these past days. "I'm sorry, Emma," groaned Rachel as she approached. "They followed me." Michael instinctively placed himself between Emma and the men, his bearing completely changing. The cold, calculating entrepreneur gave way to the protective man he didn't even know he could be. "A problem, gentlemen?" His voice carried the weight of generations of power and influence. The taller of the men smiled without humor. "None with you, Mr. Anderson. Our business is with the lady. She was considering our business proposal." "Any business with her?" "Faye's now with me," declared Michael, surprising himself with the firmness of his words. Emma grabbed his arm, her voice an urgent whisper. "Don't get involved in this, Mr. Anderson. It's not your problem." "Yes, it is," he replied without taking his eyes off the men. "It always has been." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of two hospital security guards, alerted by the unusual movement. The loan sharks backed away, but not without launching a final warning. "This isn't over," whispered the taller one. "See you soon, Emma." After their departure, Rachel collapsed onto one of the chairs, sobbing. "Forgive me, Emma. They discovered where I lived. They threatened my family." Emma took her friend in her arms, her heart beating irregularly. Michael observed the scene with a new perspective. It was as if for the first time he truly saw the world beyond the glass walls of his office. "We need to talk," he said when Rachel calmed down. "But not here." Emma hesitated, looking toward her mother's room. As if reading her thoughts, Michael added, "I've already made arrangements for her to be transferred to St. Luke's Hospital today. The best doctors have already been contacted. I said I don't want—" "This isn't charity," he interrupted her again, his voice softer. "It's the minimum I can do after discovering this." He pulled out another envelope from the inside pocket. Of his jacket, older, more yellowed, Emma immediately recognized the Anderson Construction letterhead. "I found it in my father's personal archives," explained Michael. "It's a confession, Emma. Barbara Mitchell and other board members falsified the evidence against your father because he had discovered a much larger embezzlement scheme. My father, he knew the truth afterward, but it was too late." Emma's legs wavered. Michael supported her, guiding her to a chair. The contact between them, though brief, sent an electric current through both their bodies. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice broken. "Because I've spent my entire life believing that strength meant not needing anyone," he replied, kneeling to be at eye level with her. "You taught me differently. Every cup of coffee, every note, every gesture of attention. You showed me there's more strength in allowing oneself to be human than in all the walls I built around myself." At that moment, the door to the room opened and a nurse rushed out. "Miss Carter, your mother has woken up. She's asking for you." Emma rose quickly, but before entering the room, she turned to Michael. "This doesn't magically change everything, you know." "I know," he nodded. "But it's a start." While Emma entered the room, Michael made a phone call. "Frank, I need you to expedite that investigation on Barbara Mitchell. And one more thing. Find everything you can about two loan sharks who are threatening someone important to me." Across town, in her luxurious office, Barbara received a phone call that made her pale. Her hands trembled as she hung up. On her desk, an old photo showed her, Robert Anderson, and other board members at a company event. Her eyes fixed on Anthony Carter, almost hidden in the background, holding a folder she now knew contained evidence that could destroy everything she had built. Night was falling on New York, bringing with it the promise of changes that none of those involved could predict. At the hospital, Emma held her mother's hand, telling her about the recent events, while Michael, outside, made another call, this time to his mother at the rehabilitation clinic. "Mom," he said when she answered, his voice charged with long repressed emotion. "I think I've finally understood what you've always tried to tell me about Dad." At the other end of the line, Ellen Anderson smiled through her tears, clutching to her chest an old letter she had kept all these years, a letter from Robert confessing his regret for the Carter case. A letter she now knew it was time to show her son. Fate, in its mysterious wisdom, had intertwined these lives in a way none of them could have foreseen. And now, between revelations and new beginnings, love and redemption, the true story was just beginning to unfold. The transfer of Mrs. Rose Carter to St. Luke's Hospital took place the next morning, with a discretion that contrasted with the storm of emotions that agitated all those involved. Emma observed, with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension, as her mother was settled into a private room with a view of the hospital garden. The change was so drastic it seemed unreal, as if they had jumped from one world to another in just a few hours. "Daughter," called Mrs. Rose Carter, her voice stronger than in recent days, "come here." Emma approached the bed, holding her mother's hand in hers. The contrast between the physical fragility and the strength in Mrs. Rose Carter's gaze still impressed her. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. "Not because we're in this hospital, but because you never lost your dignity." The words struck Emma like a precise arrow. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." But before she could continue, a light knock at the door interrupted the conversation. It was Ellen Anderson, elegant even in her apparent fragility, leaning on Michael's arm. "May I?" she said, her voice carrying a kindness that surprised Emma. "I hope I'm not interrupting." The silence that followed was dense, charged with untold stories and shared pains. Michael observed the scene with a mixture of apprehension and hope. It was the first time his mother had voluntarily left the clinic in months. "Mrs. Carter," Ellen began, approaching the bed, "I've taken too long to do this." From her bag she pulled out a yellowed envelope, different from the others that had emerged in recent days. "Robert gave it to me before he died. It was supposed to be given to your husband, but—" Mrs. Rose Carter took the envelope with a trembling hand. Emma moved closer to help her open it, but her mother made a negative gesture. "No, daughter. Some things we must do alone." The letter in the envelope was brief, but its content made Mrs. Rose Carter bring her hand to her lips, silent tears flowing down her face. "Anthony always said he was innocent," she whispered. "Until his last day." Ellen sat on the edge of the bed, a surprisingly intimate gesture. "Robert carried this guilt to the end. It wasn't just your husband who was destroyed at that time, Mrs. Carter. My husband never recovered from what he did. Power, money, all of it has a price that we pay with our humanity." Emma observed the interaction with a tight heart, feeling Michael's hand discreetly find hers. The touch, though light, conveyed strength and promise. Outside the hospital, however, Barbara Mitchell was not willing to let the past resurface so easily. In her office, she confronted Frank, Michael's assistant, with a calculated smile. "How much?" she asked simply. Frank raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? Don't play dumb. How much to keep me informed of all of Michael's movements, especially about this closeness with the Carter family?" The assistant adjusted his tie, uncomfortable. "Ms. Mitchell, I—" "Think carefully," she interrupted him, sliding an envelope across the table. "Your loyalty to Michael has earned you what? A mediocre salary and unpaid overtime. I can offer much more." What Barbara didn't know was that at that precise moment, each of her words was being recorded. Frank wasn't there by chance. He was part of a meticulously designed plan by Michael. Back at the hospital, Emma had moved away to get coffee, leaving her mother conversing with Ellen. In the hallway, Michael joined her. "Emma," he called, his voice rougher than usual, "we need to talk." She turned, finding in his eyes a vulnerability that disarmed her. "About what?" "About us. About all of this. About how I've spent so much time building walls that I didn't realize I was imprisoning myself." "Mr. Anderson." "No," he gently interrupted her. "Don't call me that, not anymore." The moment was interrupted by the ringing of Michael's phone. It was Frank with news that hardened his face. "What is it?" asked Emma, noticing the change in his expression. "Barbara," he replied, putting away his phone. "She's trying to buy Frank to spy on us. But it's not just that. He's discovered something in the old archives. Something that explains why she was so determined to keep this story buried. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What? Your father didn't just discover an embezzlement system, explained Michael, his voice low and intense. He discovered that Barbara was selling privileged information from the construction company to competitors. The money from the social project was just the tip of the iceberg. The sound of something falling made them both turn around. Ellen was standing in the hallway, pale as a ghost. I knew it, she whispered. Robert tried to tell me before he died, but I wasn't in a state to understand. Emma quickly approached to support Ellen, but the older woman recomposed herself with surprising dignity. Enough, declared Ellen, with a firmness she hadn't shown for a long time. Enough of secrets, enough of lies. Robert may have made his mistakes, but I will not allow his legacy to be tainted by this woman. Michael had never seen his mother like this, strong, determined, present. It was as if the weight of years of depression and isolation had been momentarily suspended by a greater purpose. At that moment, Emma's phone vibrated with a message that froze her blood. It was a photo of her former home in the suburbs with a message from the loan sharks. We know all your secrets, including those of Anderson Construction. Either you collaborate or everyone will know. Michael, who was reading over her shoulder, immediately embraced her. I won't let anything happen to you, he whispered in her ear. Never again. The embrace, the first real contact between them, triggered a wave of emotions that neither was prepared to elaborate on. It was as if all the walls, all the social differences, all the painful past had momentarily disappeared, leaving only two people who, against all odds, had found in each other something they didn't even know they were looking for. Ellen observed the scene with a gentle smile, remembering what it was like to be young and believed that love could heal all wounds. But she also knew, better than anyone, that some demons had to be faced before any healing was possible. In the room, Mrs. Rose Carter held Robert Anderson's letter clutched to her chest, her silent prayers asking not for vengeance or justice but peace, the peace her husband had never found in his lifetime, the peace her daughter deserved after so much suffering, the peace that, perhaps, was finally within everyone's reach. What no one knew was that Barbara Mitchell was about to make her most desperate move. The next morning, explosive headlines would hit the newspapers, threatening to destroy not only Anderson Construction's reputation, but also the fragile connection that was beginning to form between two families, marked by a past of pain and redemption. Dawn broke over New York with explosive headlines in all the major newspapers. Scandal at Anderson Construction, heir involved with housekeeper amid corruption suspicions. The photos showed Michael and Emma at the hospital, the moment of embrace, captured and distorted to appear as something sordid. Barbara Mitchell had played her last card. At St. Luke's Hospital, Emma discovered the news through frantic messages from Rachel. Her first instinct was to run to her mother's room, fearing that Mrs. Rose Carter had already seen the newspapers. To her surprise, she found not only her mother, but also Ellen Anderson, both having breakfast together like old friends. "Daughter," called Mrs. Rose Carter upon seeing her, "you won't believe what Ellen just told me about Anthony." Emma stopped at the door, feeling the weight of the newspaper she held in her bag. Ellen looked at her with understanding. "We've already seen the news, my dear," she said softly. "Barbara has always been predictable in her attacks, but this time she's made a mistake." "What mistake?" asked Emma, approaching hesitantly. "She forgot that some stories are stronger than any scandal," replied Ellen, pulling an old photo album from her bag. "Look at this." The photos showed scenes from an almost forgotten past, young Anthony Carter and Robert Anderson working together on the construction company's early projects. In one particularly touching photo, the two men smiled, arms around each other's shoulders in front of a newly completed work. "Your father and mine," explained Ellen, "started together. Anthony wasn't just an employee. He was the first true friend Robert had in the construction industry. He was the one who taught my husband the importance of building not just buildings, but legacies." Mrs. Rose Carter held one of the photos with a trembling hand. Anthony talked so much about that time, before everything went wrong. The moment was interrupted by Michael's arrival. His aspect was serious, but there was a determination in his eyes that Emma had never seen before. "I just came from an emergency board meeting," he announced. "Barbara didn't show up, but Frank did, with all the evidence we've gathered." "And?" asked Ellen, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "It's over, Mum. The board voted unanimously for her removal, and there's something else. Several former employees from Dad's time are coming forward, confirming Mr. Carter's story. The truth always finds a way." Emma felt her legs tremble. Michael was by her side in an instant, supporting her. This time there was no concern about who might see or photograph. There were just two hearts, finally finding their rhythm together. "But there are still the loan sharks," Emma whispered against his chest. "They still have that information." "Not anymore," said a voice from the door. It was Frank, holding a folder. "The police just arrested them. It seems Barbara Mitchell had many enemies, and some of them were more than willing to collaborate when they learned she had fallen." The news was like a wave of relief that washed away years of tension and fear. Mrs. Rose Carter began to cry silently, decades of pain finally finding their release. Ellen approached her, holding her hand in a gesture of solidarity that transcended social classes and old resentments. "You know," said Ellen, looking at her son and Emma, "Robert always said that a building is as strong as its foundations. I believe the same is true for people. We are as strong as the truths we choose to defend." Michael looked at Emma, seeing in her no longer the employee who had entered his life to clean his house, but the woman who had cleaned his soul of prejudices and fears. "Emma," he said softly, "I know we still have a lot to rebuild, a lot to heal, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to do it with you. Not as boss and servant, not as rich and poor, but as two people who have discovered that the best constructions are those made with foundations of truth and walls of love." Emma looked at her mother, who nodded with a smile through tears, then at Ellen, who seemed more alive and present than ever. "Sometimes," replied Emma, finally allowing herself to smile without reservations, "life presents us with projects that seem impossible. But I believe I've learned that the best projects are precisely those, the ones that challenge us to build something greater than ourselves." The kiss that followed wasn't a movie kiss, with fireworks and background music. It was a real-life kiss, sweet, true, full of promises, and also challenges. A kiss that sealed not only the love between two people, but the healing between two families. In the weeks that followed, many things changed at Anderson Construction. Anthony Carter's name was publicly rehabilitated, and a new social project was created in his memory. Emma decided to use her experience to coordinate this project, transforming her personal story of overcoming into inspiration for others. Mrs. Rose Carter fully recovered with the new treatment and began to regularly visit the gardens of the Anderson Villa, where she developed an improbable but deep friendship with Ellen. The two women, marked in different ways by the same story, found in each other the understanding that only time and wisdom can bring. Michael transformed the company's management, prioritizing transparency and social responsibility. But his greatest transformation was personal. He learned that true strength doesn't lie in high walls or locked safes, but in the courage to allow oneself to be human, to love and be loved. On a quiet afternoon, months later, Emma found a note on the desk she now occupied at the construction company. "I still make your coffee every morning, but now out of love, not obligation. She smiled, keeping the note with all the others she collected. Small testimonies that sometimes love arrives not like lightning, but like a patient construction, brick by brick, truth after truth, until forming something so solid that no storm can bring it down. And so, as the sun set over New York, casting golden shadows on the buildings that punctuated the horizon, two souls that fate had separated because of prejudices and lies